problem with my room, maybe with my Zoom, pardon me. I just recovered it, so we'll start in a minute. Now looks like everything is fine. Okay, so today we'll be talking about uh, several other issues and problems. No, sorry. I need to share the screen, and that's something which will happen. Uh, yeah, bad day. Bad day for Zoom. It really doesn't want to do what uh, I wanted to do for me. Okay, yeah. Finally, I've got what I wanted to, and let's do it. Okay, guys. Once again, sorry for the delay. Something like that happens. So we'll continue our talk concerning cultural dimensions. If you remember, previously we discussed Hofstadter cultural dimensions. There are 6 dimensions. Hofstadter's classification is among the most popular one, especially if you speak about what happens in business. Still, there are some questions concerning how many dimensions we need, how stable they are. And in fact, this article, which I will probably post into LMS for those one among you who are curious concerning this problem of cultural dimension, addresses one of the problems we encounter with when we use Hofstadter. It was offered by Sjord Bergensdik and Chris Welzel. And let me introduce you to some of the considerations they wanted to take into account. Okay. Some of you are pretty comfortable with statistics. Some of you probably are not. So I will try to explain it to you, and I will try to explain it to you simply. By the way, talking about economists who are supposed to be comfortable with statistics, they use this term factor differently compared to how political scientists, psychologists, sociologists do it. So what you see in this table, factor means a hidden dimension, which cannot be measured, um, directly, but which could be measured indirectly. And in fact, the scores which you see in this table, they're like correlation coefficients. Just a reminder for some of you which are not really immersed into statistics, correlation coefficients could vary from +1 to -1. So as you can see, these numbers are correlations with a particular Hofstadter cultural dimension with a particular factor. And well, what should we pay attention to? In fact, the procedure which was used is something which is called factor analysis. That's an algorithm which analyzes correlation metrics and reveals how many dimensions do we have in fact. You remember that Hofstadter announced that classification which he created has 6 dimensions. Initially it was 4, then he added some more dimensions lately, 5th and 6th. What you see here, in fact, it looks like in reality what they did, they analyzed questions which are used to compute Hofstadter stores. They use data from World Value Survey. That's a program which exists for already more than 30 years. And every 5 or 4 years, they make a survey in 100 different countries. So this data was used, And what you can see here on the slide, look at the power distance and individualism score. In fact, they are strongly correlated to the same factor, which is factor 1. And it looks like, those people who are strong, those countries which are strong individualists, and these are data were driven from 62 countries, as you can see. Simultaneously, they low power distance means higher individualism, and vice versa. So in fact, there is just one dimension between these two. High power distance corresponds to collectivism, and low power distance corresponds to individualism. So we already lost one dimension. Yeah, in fact, it's 5. It's not 6. If you look at masculinity, femininity, it looks like it's a unique dimension. It belongs only to one factor, and that factor 3. Correlation of the factor with other dimensions are pretty low. Then it's a similar case with uncertainty avoidance. Similar case in what way? It looks like it does not have any significant scores on factor 2 and factor 3, but it has, moderate correlation with factor 1, which means that also that there is also a tendency. If culture is high in power distance, it's also high in uncertainty avoidance, and vice versa. So looks like we lost one more dimension. And finally, as you can see, a long-term orientation and indulgence versus restraint are also strongly correlated with one another. Look to the column which corresponds to the factor 2. Yeah, they are negatively correlated, so those countries who are long-term, they are less indulgent, and vice versa. All in all, it looks like in reality, when we are using Hofstadter dimension, it's 3-dimensional structure, not a 6-dimensional structure. Sorry if it seems to be complicated to some of you. In fact, it's not. It's very straightforward. Maybe you already noted that when we read description of the questions and other dimensions which Hofstadter used, reasoning about his cultural classification, some of them were rather vague. One more illustration for you. These are correlations of Hofstadter 5 cultural dimensions with the questions which we use to measure these dimensions. For example, high individualism is highly correlated with an item, live to make parents proud. But the same goes to power distance, as you can see. It also has a very strong correlation. And almost as high as correlation of the sound item of long orientation basis. Speaking about attitude toward homosexuality, if homosexuality justified, once again, individualism and power distance go hand in hand. I will give you some time, just look in this table and you can find some examples more. For example, attitudes toward if people can be trusted, once again, they are correlated to 3 dimensions simultaneously: individualism, power distance, and uncertainty avoidance. And that's a problem, of course, for this particular measurement instrument. I mean, the dimensions which were suggested by Hofstadter, they are insightful. It's interesting to read about that. Speaking about measurement, as you can see, we have some problems concerning measurement. And in the bottom part of the table, as you can see, it's about 2 newer dimensions, and it looks like they're quite correlated with one another either. Okay, now that was a criticism of Hofstadter dimensions from one of the principal authors is Christian Welzel. And Christian Welzel is somebody who works for a long period of time with Ronald Inglehart. That's a short biographic information concerning Ronald Inglehart. As you can see, he was born in year 1984. So he is 86 now, and he'll be 87 this year. He's a really prominent political scientist who worked all his life at the University of Michigan. Now he is emeritus, so it means that he does not have any current teaching responsibilities. But he still continues teaching. And later, I will provide you an opportunity to listen to him. I will provide you a link. And he's also affiliated to High School of Economics, as you can see in the bottom sentence. So let's speak about classification of cultures and cultural dimensions, which were suggested by Ronald Inglehart and his long-term collaborator, Christian Welzel. Christian Welzel is from Germany, from Leuphana University. Okay, so they suggested somebody, in fact, it was Inglehart who suggested it first, and then Welzel developed this theory, which is called modernization theory. And when we classify cultures and clusters, modernization theory has several suppositions, ideas, which are quite easy to understand. In general, the idea behind modernization is that economic development is bringing systemic value changes, systemic changes in societies in general. When economic development contributes to progress, when situation improves, there are some motivational changes which have important implications and which influence back on economics. How it happens and what kind of changes we could observe when economics develops, when there is economical progress. First of all, more of gender inequality. It starts with quite an obvious change. Females come into market. They are also allowed to join educational institutions. For example, for 19th century, it was quite a difficult problem for females to get college level university education in the majority of countries in the world. Nowadays, it's not a problem any longer. In fact, something which just opposite happens. There are more females among college graduates compared to males. And speaking about our country, YEGA helped a lot this process because typically female high school graduates, they have higher YEGA scores than males, so that helps them, to build their professional careers. Greater tolerance toward minorities, people with different social orientation, toward foreigners, toward other outgroups. In fact, when we are talking, well, let's say about 19th and the beginning of 20th century, there was a lot of prejudices concerning those people who belong to different ethnicities and races, or those ones who have minority sexual orientation, gays and lesbians. The general situation changes. In general, there is such a factor as diminishing xenophobia. If you got a chance to travel the world, typically in big cities all around the world, there is quite a diverse population. So humanity learned to acknowledge diversity and to live with diversity. And finally, the final result of all these changes is democracy. economic development contributes to democracy. And there is a reverse effect, of course. When we are talking about the majority of industrially developed, technologically developed, and leading countries in the world, they are democracies, with one very visible and significant exception, that's People's Republic of China, which still has quite particular. I would not like to go into details by now, but I think what I'm talking about, the leading role of Communist Party is still written in the constitution. That's how it happens. Although there is a lot of economical freedom in China nowadays, so it makes it different compared to what it used to be before. So, according to Ingel Carter and Welzel, development and cultural change move into major phases. First of all, industrialization, which happens in the 19th century, brings a shift from traditional values to secular rational values. To put it shortly, the role of religion diminishes when we speak about that kind of trend which we witness. In a few minutes, I will discuss with you in more details how they measure traditional values and secular rational values. The second trend happened in the second part of 20th century. Post-industrial phase, post-industrial society brings a shift from survival values to self-expression values. Probably when I mentioned this, at least to some of you who is familiar with this Abraham Maslow theory of social needs, it rings the bells. It reminds you about something, yeah? Speaking about Maslow pyramid, survival is the foundation of the pyramid. And self-expression, which Maslow calls self-actualization, sits at the very top. What does it mean? Self-actualization means that humans live up to full strength of their talents and potential. They manage to realize their talents and potentials to full degree. So, what are traditional values? They emphasize the importance of religion, parent-child relationships, which are very asymmetric. Parents instructs their children what to do, and children obey, and authority. People who embrace these trends tend to reject divorce. Well, as you know, divorce was considered to be a sin by, for example, Christian religion. And those people who wanted to divorce in 19th century Russia and at the beginning of 20th century, they had to get an approval from the part of the church. Only after that it could happen. Abortion, once again, the majority, many, not the majority, but many world religions, they object something which is called pro-choice. Yeah, there is a discussion between those people who are against abortions. Don't misunderstand me. Of course, abortion is not a good thing if there are no medical reasons. Still, you know, comparing the kind of problems which we have in our country, that sometimes newborn babies are disposed by their mothers into garbage cans, is something which is not valuable whatsoever and not wanted whatsoever. I would support the right of females for abortion if they really do not want to give birth to somebody. From my point of view, that's something that needs to be taken into consideration. But once again, you know, childbirth is an absolutely wonderful thing which could happen in somebody's life, if that's a desire of the parents to have kids. Euthanasia, as you can know, in some countries, for example, in the Netherlands, and in some others, people have a right to terminate their lives if they think that either they experience very a kind of sufferings which they cannot really stand any longer. And unfortunately, that happens to some ill persons who have cancer. For example, talking about our country, there were several episodes which made it into media when even those persons who enjoyed quite high social status, like retired military generals or admirals, used their personal weapon to terminate their lives because it was impossible for them to get narcotics, which can alleviate the sufferings, at least to a certain degree, and that's something which they did. Or another reason for which is used in some countries to acknowledge that euthanasia could be a life choice for somebody who is terminally ill. It could be a quick debilitation of the person. When sure he loses intelligence and becomes, pardon me for using this term, a vegetable. So somebody who remains a human being, but it's not able to any kind of intellectual activity. And suicide, well, suicide is a bad thing, of course, but euthanasia is a very special kind of suicide. In people with traditional values, citizens exhibit high levels of nationalism and national pride, typically. Once again, we can discuss with you how sincere is something is displayed. This way, well, speaking about our country, recently, patriotism and what we understand under this name became a matter of discussion. And that's something that should happen, in fact, because, uh, patriotism definitely should not be used in commercial purposes. Okay, secular rational values tend to relate to liberal ways of feeling. So they take an opposite stand to many problems which we already mentioned above. Survival values revere economic and physical security and safety, and are linked to low levels of trust and tolerance. And survival is really something which is essential. That's one of the reasons why, for example, in our country, many persons and families make a decision to migrate from countryside and big small towns to big cities. One of the reasons is that economic situation in big cities in general is much more favorable. It's easier to survive. It's easier to find a job. It's easier to find a well-paid job. And that's what people do. Self-expression values give high priority to protecting the environment, sustainability. It became a buzzword, at least in business world, yeah, and in civil world in general. Promoting gender equality and tolerating foreigners, gays and lesbians. Once again, this topic will be mentioned all the time because according to Ingelhart and Welzel theory, well, tolerance toward minorities is really important, and I solidarize with them on that matter. Minorities always were in human history, and they will always be, including sexual minorities. Now, guys, after I introduce you to some basic ideas, it will be a good time for you to listen to Ronald Inglehart himself. He gave an interview to Oksana Boyka, who represents RT, not my favorite TV channel, but whatever. And according to Decorum, it happened here. It's in Petersburg or maybe in Moscow, I don't know. So I will publish a link for you. I have requests. You can skip the first 3 minutes of this talk. So start from the first two, in fact, start from the first minute and then go for the next 15 minutes, please. So I expect you back in 15 minutes after you listen to Ronald Inglehart. Okay, too early. So I will stop sharing for a while and I will share a link with you guys. Wait a second. It will be coming. And I expect you back in 15 minutes. it's amazing, when somebody he was 84 at the time he gives an interview, is so intellectually agile and speaks so well. Like he's a really good speaker, and hopefully we'll enjoy him. Okay,
We in Russia have so many people like this.
pardon me.
In Russia, we have people like this a lot.
Yeah, good. Okay, guys, so that's the link to his talk. So please listen to him and please come back in 15 minutes, okay? Have you got the link? Just let me know if everything is okay.
Yes, everything is
Yep,
okay.
yep.
Okay, so I expect you back in 15 minutes, please. Are you back, guys? Are you back, guys? Could I proceed? Okay, guys, please come back. I think that the first 15 minutes of the talk will do for our purposes. So please come back and let's proceed. Hmm. Okay, so yeah, I'm sharing the screen with you again. Let's have a look on graphical representation of what you learned from me and from Engelhardt's talk. Basically, as you can see, his structure is somewhat less complicated. You remember that in theory, Hofstede has 6 dimensions. In reality, it looks like he has 3. From Engelhardt point of view, 2 dimensions will do. So horizontal line, what we see in horizontal line is survival self-expression. Yeah, if you move from the left to the right, you'll get from survival area to self-expression area. And vertical line is traditional versus secular rational authority. And we have several clusters. First of all, we have a cluster of which belongs to Northern Europe. And what you see here, why it's still West Germany, because when Engelhardt had started his survey, there was also an the East Germany. After reunification, it became the same state, but he still prefers to demonstrate the differences. As you can see, speaking about maximal degree of self-expression and secular values, the leaders are Scandinavian cultures. Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Finland, Netherlands, which is not a Scandinavian country, but it's northern country, are pretty close. What about our culture? And we belong to the cluster, to green one, as communist cultures. As you can see, we are pretty high on secular dimension. And you can ask me, and what about religious revival, which we have now? Well, speaking about Orthodox religion, which comprise the majority of population, at least according to survey data, we need to discern between a kind of, symbolic affiliation, a ritualistic affiliation, and deep affiliation. And in fact, probably it will not be a surprise for you that, especially when we speak about younger generations and middle generations, few people are really affiliated to church. From time to time, they take part in some religious rituals, like when they come to the funerals or when they get married, and that's it. They do not do it on a regular basis. There are some other countries which are much more traditional. That were, have a look at Poland. Catholic Church is still very powerful in Poland, and that is why Poland is much lower compared to our country on this dimension. Still speaking about self-expression and self-expression survival are in a very obvious fashion correlated to economic development because Russia, and here we see Moscow, in fact, this particular graph, but that's Russia. We are in the beginning of the way because for many of our competitors, survival is really something which they have to do on daily basis. People take 2, 3, sometimes even more jobs because they are not really well paid. And that's something which is contrary to official reports, because what is reported officially, including data which is reported to Mr. Putin, they are definitely different from what exists in reality. And recently there were some episodes when he was asked questions about this kind of discrepancy when he met with some local people. Yes, so general trend is moving to the left-right corner. Although it happens with different pace for different countries. Why? One of the answers to this question is that values is not something, and that's something which Engelhardt mentioned in his talk, is not something which changed and changes, we change quickly. It takes some time. And in fact, there are some irregularities. For example, what I would also like to mention, recently they started, and that was on the table which I showed you, comparing the cultural dimensions with happiness. And in fact, a kind of regular trend is the increase of happiness when we move to the right and up. People tend to be happier on those countries which have more democracy, which is related to self-expression and values and sexual authorities. Still, there are some exceptions. For example, our country, in fact, after regression models were run, in which happiness is predicted for different countries by the degree of economic development. So we are lower on happiness than the model predicts. Why? Well, one of the answers is following. Many people in our country consider our country as one of the, well, superpowers, leading countries in the world. We are superpower. If you take a military dimension, we still have nuclear rockets. In fact, a lot of them. But speaking about economic development, unfortunately, we are not at the top whatsoever. And the level of inspiration for those people who live in our country is pretty high, especially after Russian citizens got an opportunity to travel around the world and to compare. And of course, mass media and internet contributed to a lot to this process too. Who is higher in happiness than is predicted? Latin America. All the Latin American countries are not particularly rich, and still there are a lot of poor people. They tend to be happier. So that's something which is related to values. Economical development doesn't predict everything. It predicts only some dimensions. So human values turn out to be surprisingly coherent. And now that is why he used that bidimensional chart. One more illustration of a similar tendency. That's comparison of the year 2000 with the year 206. As you can see, the trend is to move to the right and up, at least for some of the countries. Yeah. And that's the most recent representation of cultural clusters. As you can see, we are in Orthodox clusters, in the center of Orthodox clusters. For example, compared to Georgia and Armenia, Russia is somewhat higher in circular rational values. And I would agree that in the two countries which I just mentioned, religion plays a more significant role compared to what happens in our country. Okay? And in this particular graph, it dates back to earlier period from 1981 to 2007. Well, as I can see, in our country, we have a reverse trend, for example, considering secular values. And of course, everybody knows Soviet Union used to be a secular, even atheistic country. Russia, well, is different on that respect. But talking about trends in Protestant Europe, English-speaking countries, and Latin America, India, as you can see, they are more or less constant on this vertical dimension, but talking about self-expression, they are moving rapidly into direction of self-expression. Now, guys, yeah, recently I already discussed happiness with you. We also change this kind of theory somewhat, because instead of talking about traditional secular and survival self-expression value, he started speaking about liberation values, values which are conducive to democracy. Once again, that's some kind of cycle. Economic development helps to develop, to change values, and values in their turn helps to promote democracy and economic growth. Now, let's do a little bit more theory, and after that, we'll start dealing with some methodological issues. Ethic versus emic approach to studying cultures. The term was coined, pardon me, guys. This term was coined and introduced by linguist Pike in year 1954, and is based on the decision between phonetics and phonemics. So, as you can see, phonetics is the study of universal sounds used in all human languages. For example, it looks like some vowels like O, A, E are present in almost all languages on our planet. Speaking about consonants, it's much more complicated, because in some African languages, for example, they use this kind of cracking sounds, like, which we do not use in our language, but we are able to reproduce and to hear. Phonemics is the study of sounds that are particular to specific language. So Pike thought that this ethic-emic distinction could be generalized beyond linguistics. Ethic approaches aim to discover what all humans have in common. So you can easily guess that when we discuss Hofstede, Engelhardt and Welzel, during the seminar today, some of you were already introduced, and others will be introduced to globe dimension, another classification of human values and cultural dimensions. It's supposed that dimensions are the same in all cultures. What changes is how much this dimension is characteristic to a certain culture, but it still will be there. According to emic approach, in fact, what we need to do is to try to figure out particular dimensions for different cultures. For example, something which is present in one culture could be absent in the other. Talking about Russian culture, we really do not have a special word for something which is quite visible and essential for English-speaking countries. I mean privacy. We can explain what privacy is about, but we do not have a particular word for that. And the same could go for something we have in our culture. For example, intelligentsia, that was a word which was borrowed from Russian by some other cultures. But they do not have this word because intelligentsia doesn't mean just educated stratum of society. It implies many other qualities related to attitudes to the world. For example, compassion, the preparedness to suffer and to accept sufferings for the sake of humanity, and so on and so on and so on. Another example, yeah, first of all, one more set of definitions. So, emic account, a description of behavior or a belief in terms of meaningful, unconscious to the actor. Because something which, looking from outside, we can perceive as something which is particular, it could be quite natural to those people who live inside the culture. It does not require any explanation for them. For example, I would use a rather sinister and gloomy example. In some cultures, they still have a tradition coming back to medieval times, which is called the murder of honor. A person who made damage to family's pride could be just killed. Unfortunately, it still happens to young women who, according to their religious opinion, compromised integrity and respect for the family. They're just killed. In other cultures, there is no such notion as the murder of honor. And the problem became visible when migrants, let's say, it's not related, of course, to Muslim religion as a religion, but some migrants from countries where where Islam is a dominant religion, they practice murders of honor. That's something which happens, for example, in Sweden, where there is quite sizable minority belonging to Muslim religion. It happens in other Western industrially developed countries, like in Canada. There was a really visible case. That's a really sad story because 4 women were killed by their brother and parents who thought that their lifestyle was something which
Isn't
was.
that their right? I'm sorry, but shouldn't this qualify as their right to exercise their freedoms, their beliefs, and their tradition? And
Killing somebody. Do you think that it's something which is acceptable?
I believe that that's a dilemma. And if this is the way that they have lived on for millennia, then
Okay.
they should have a right to do that.
In fact, you surprised and almost shocked me. What about cannibalism? Cannibalism used to be traditional. When we speak about early humans, what about considering cannibalism as something which is legal? Humans could really be used as food.
I believe that we are not to say how people should act, and it is inappropriate to exercise and expand my values on other people and tell other people how they should act, and claiming a moral high ground just because I don't eat human flesh, but I still eat cow flesh is irrelevant and kind of self-centric.
Well, to a certain degree, I could agree with you because we really need to acknowledge cultural differences, and that's what we try to do, during our lectures and seminars. Still, acknowledging the right of one human being for killing another human being, if it happens not in particular circumstances like during war times and or when one human being is defending himself or herself or other persons for this kind of event, for this kind of encroachment on their rights. That's something which I cannot really accept. So if you'll be willing, we can discuss it in some more details during the seminar. But my opinion, I mean, once again, I'm not a kind of supernatural person who can dictate his views to everybody else. From my perception, there is no way to justify the murders which were committed because somebody thought that pride was compromised. What you are correct about, for example, if you make some historical comparisons, in 19th century, duels were considered as something which is natural and which could be allowed. I think, from my point of view, we are fortunate ones because we do not acknowledge them as something which is valuable any longer. A right to live is one of the most essential and important values in the world. And if somebody from the family wants to change radically his or her lifestyle, they definitely deserve this kind of right. So pardon me, once again, I'll be willing to discuss these issues in more details. Especially, I hope that after the spring break, an exam session will be meeting live. So yeah, why not? Okay, let's stop at this point. Ethic approach, another illustration is depression. For example, there were some surveys which demonstrated that when we speak about depression, there is, if not a unanimous, but a mutual understanding what depression is in cultures which belong to Western cultures. Still speaking about Native Americans, Hopi Indians, they can use this depression scale, which was developed in English-speaking cultures, but they do not have this kind of word in Hopi language. Oh, they have something else which they call Hopi illness. And this phenomenon is pretty similar to what they use, in medical manuals. Still, it's somewhat different too, because, for example, people who experience this Hopi illness syndrome are heartbroken. They experience weight loss, disrupted sleep, fatigue, psychomotor retardation, and agitation, loss of libido, and sense of sinfulness, shame. So typically, so probably what we need to do is to try to synthesize somehow ethic and emic approach. Once again, emic approach is reasonable. There are certain notions in some cultures which is difficult to understand to other cultures. And if it's related to some kind of, lifestyles and behavior, for example, I can easily understand the desire of people who belong to some country to have a particular clothing style, including wearing hijabs. But once again, killing somebody because some people tend to justify it by tradition, that's something which I personally cannot accept completely. Okay, once again, that's a summary of dimensions of Welso and Engelhardt model of democratization. Just have a look on them, I wouldn't comment. And then let's have a take on some issues. So, for example, according to Engelhardt and Welso research, we can observe Russia's shift to traditional religious pole. In fact, from my point of view, it's somewhat more complicated. What I've shown you just now, it's a survey which Russian pollster firm conducted several years ago. In fact, that poll was commissioned by the patriarchy, by religious authorities. And what appeared? Only 26%, one quarter of those ones who describe themselves as Orthodox Christians, do believe in life after death and resurrection. And in fact, that's one of the cornerstones of Orthodox religion. How could somebody who do not believe in afterlife and resurrection consider himself as the same as being a Christian? Even more, 54% do not believe, and 20 are undecided. By the way, another interesting thing is that, in fact, many people who consider them to be Christians, they do not believe in hell, but they believe in paradise. It's some kind of, supermarket approach. I take what I want, I reject what I do not want. As you can see, measuring values is really difficult. We have some kind of religious revival. In fact, the number of pilgrims, people who travel around the country, visiting monasteries, nunneries, temples, has increased. Still, pretty often, these people do not really behave themselves as religious persons are supposed to behave themselves. We have a researcher, at School of Economics, St. Petersburg, who in fact conducted research on these persons. And what he observed in some cases, for example, some female pilgrims took baths naked in front of the men's monastery. Why? Because, they considered that just putting some holy water on themselves will not be a remedy. But dipping themselves into the water will have much stronger effect, and so on and so on and so on. So that's a really important topic, but I would not exaggerate the degree of religion survival, which is recent. Now, finally, guys, because I will part with you. That's one of the questions which were used in one of the World Value Survey. In fact, it was originated by Norbert Schwartz, Israeli psychologist, but Inge Wells uses too. So the question was, is it important to this person to think up new ideas? And that was a question about respondents. Is it important to you, in fact? And you can see the distribution of those people who agree to disagree with this value. Do you see anything unusual or surprising? Well, Sweden, Finland, Britain, other leaders, our country somewhere in the middle, yeah. It looks like, for me, it looks surprising that Japan is not very particular concerning thinking up new ideas, because Japanese managed to introduce a lot of technological innovations. Now, watch the next slide. These are real places which different countries took on this dimension. Finland is number 15. And we are talking about approximately 70 countries. Finland, number 30. United Kingdom, 31. Russia, 38. Germany, 40. Spain, 49. Japan, 50 place. Who are the leaders? Now I will show you what countries are the leaders on that dimension. I will not comment it for some time, just have a look and get some opinion on this matter. Ghana, Mali, well, Cyprus, Zambia, Chile, Morocco, Burkina Faso, South Africa, India, Jordan. Okay, maybe India, a big country, maybe there are a lot of innovations over there. But talking about Ghana and Mali, have you heard about some technological breakthroughs, scientific discoveries which originated in these two countries? With all due respect, I haven't heard.
Well, the 21st century could be called the century of Africa, and the exponential growth of their population and the importance of Africa in the modern politics could be fueled by the feeling of the Africans that they have a big future, a very big bright future, and that they could be the next leaders of the world.
Well, I won't object against that. I hope that it's something will happen, but considering that the survey was conducted, in the end of 20th century, it seems a little bit strange. In fact, I think that the answer are some measurement problems which are inherent to the kind of instruments which Engelhardt Welzel, and some other people who didn't use. In fact, what they did were public opinion polls. And public opinion polls have their advantages and disadvantages. First of all, the degree of control over the quality of survey could vary widely. And in fact, what I did, I took original data from Eaglehart and Welzel World Value surveys. And what I noted that in Ghana and Mali, there was a tendency to answer yes to any question which was asked. Like, you know, there are leaders not on just on this particular dimension, but on everything else. And I strongly suspect that it's related to low quality of those people who conducted this kind of surveys. Now, guys, I have still 2 minutes to go, which is good. We'll continue discussing it next time. Still something which is really important from my point of view is a concept which was introduced by Philip Converse, American political scientist. He suggested to discern between what he called true attitudes and non-attitudes. True attitudes is something which is displayed in behavior, something which is displayed in the choices that people make. Still, for example, when we speak about public opinion polls and they are used to predict and to describe values, there is a danger that we will get answers to some questions which are in fact non-existent. One of the examples could be coming over a competence level of somebody whom we ask questions. For example, speaking about students who are educated in political science, probably it could be relevant to ask them to describe comparable advantages and disadvantages between parliamentary and presidential democracy. Still, many persons who haven't got a college education will be lost if they will ask this kind of question. But they will provide some answers which could be recorded and used in statistical analysis. In fact, talking about particular instrument which is used by Engelhardt, Welzel, and their colleagues, it's a really long interview which is continuous, which has several hundred questions, and which takes typically no less than 2 hours for the respondent. And you can imagine that in the course of this kind of interview, and when I talked to Ronald Engelhardt, he acknowledged himself, some answers would be pretty shallow. They really will not reflect true attitude. For those people who are interested, I recommend you to read the article by John Thaler. He authored one of the best books in public opinion and mass media mass opinion analysis, The Nature and Origins of Mass Opinion. And several years after that book, he published a very interesting piece under the name Monica Lewinsky Contribution to Political Science. In fact, when we are talking about values and people attitudes, the issue is very complicated. Just in one sentence, Monica Lewinsky contribution was not the fact that he had sex with then American president oh my goodness, Bill Clinton, of course. Many Americans felt offended because United States is still a traditional country in many respects. In fact, adultery is not something the majority of Americans will improve. But although they disapproved Bill Clinton behavior, they did not support the suggestion to impeach him because he was very, very popular. He appeared to be one of the most successful presidents. And that's something which needs to take into account when we are talking about values classification based on public opinion polls and surveys. Let's stop at this point. Once again, thank you for expressing your opinions. My time is over for now. If you have any questions and any opinions to express, you are welcome to do it just now. I will stop sharing. or we can continue discussing these matters during our seminars, which I will be willing and happy to do. Okay, guys?
Excuse me, I have a
Well,
question regarding our seminars.
okay.
Do we have, could you please tell me, is the next seminar the last one where we should present our intermediate projects?
Well, what I'm thinking about it now, probably we will do it in our first class after the spring break. Because, guys, that's communication class. And as you can understand, there are a lot of limitations when we do it remotely. I cannot really see and hear you. And my colleague, Mikhail Anatolyevich, of course, cannot do it too. So I will discuss it with him, but most probably it will be the first seminar after spring break, okay? I mean,
Okay.
after the session. So in the beginning of April. Have I answered your question, Grigory?
Yeah, that's clear. Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure. Anything else? Okay, guys, bye for now. So I will have a seminar in group 2 soon. Bye for now. Thank you very much.